Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The time is exactly 2 p.m. in Jakarta and Bangkok and 3 p.m. in Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Let's start our webinar. Once again, welcome to the first webinar in the CDP Regional Capacity Building Series on forest disclosure. And today we will focus on how companies can managing forest-related risk in their commodity supply chain. I'm Rini Setiawati. I'm working under the forest program in CDP, and today I will be your host throughout this webinar. We will go through some important information to help companies in their journey towards sustainable supply chain. Particularly for today, we will focus on assessing, managing, and reporting forest-related risks. Now, before we start, let's go through some housekeeping. Next, please. So the first rule is please note that all attendees are muted upon entry and make sure that you have connected to your device audio. And if you have any question, please use the Q&A button. You can write your question throughout the webinar. The panelists will answer it if they have time on the Q&A box or live in the Q&A session if time is permitted. In addition to that, slides and recording of this webinar will be shared with all registered participants. Next, please. Now let's check the agenda for today. So for today's webinar, it will be an hour, 15 minutes event and will consist of two sessions, basically, two main sessions. The first session will be started with an overview on how to assess forest-related risks, which will be presented by Ibu Patriana from Preferred by Nature. This session will give you detail on changes in the regulatory landscape, market trend, and other aspects that can increase risk exposure to companies and how to manage this risk, including tools for risk assessment. This session will be useful for companies that have not conducted risk assessment or even for those who have implemented risk assessment. And once risk is assessed and identified, companies need to start communicating this risk and action to manage it to their stakeholders. So the second session will focus on framework for risk on disclosure, including introduction of TCFD and how companies can start disclosing their action through CDP. So this session will be hosted by Rida Nurafiati from CDP. Now, before we go into core event, next, please. We want to do a polling to understand how many of participants here are familiar or have implemented risk assessment. Can we have the poll to be showed, please? Thank you. So yes, I can see the question. Now the poll has come up. So the question is, have your organization implemented risk assessment for forest issues? So the option is yes, we have implemented, and no, but we plan to assess forest-related risk. The third option is no, forest is not my organization's interest. So I'll give you 15 seconds time to respond to this poll, and we'll share the result. Okay, I think 15 seconds have passed. Can we see the result? Okay, great. Actually, 61% participants here have been implementing forest risk assessment on forest. So, but we also have around 11% that have not, or no, this is more like 39% have not done it yet. So I think hopefully with this webinar, we can provide you with information that can equip your companies to conduct, to initiate the assessment on forest-related risk. Now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Ibu Patriana to deliver her session. Over to you, Ibu Ria.
Thank you, Bu Rini. My name is Ria. I'm a responsible sourcing specialist from Preferred by Nature. And today I'm going to be presenting about assessing forest-related risk in the commodity supply chain. Next, please. Okay, just a quick overview of our organization. Preferred by Nature, or formerly NEPCON, is an international nonprofit organization. We were founded in Denmark in 1994. We work with businesses, NGOs, governments on developing solutions to major global challenges such as deforestation and climate change. We have more than 300 full-time staff in more than 40 countries, and we have 28 registered offices across Europe, Americas, Russia, Africa, and Asia. Next, please. The objective of this presentation is to facilitate the understanding of the importance of risk assessment as a core part of due diligence process. And then after that, we're gonna go quickly to the Preferred by Nature due diligence tool, and then an overview on how to conduct risk assessment from our side. Next, please. Right, this the first part of this presentation on why we need risk assessment. Next, please. Okay, the first reason why we need the risk assessment is because more markets are implementing regulations on corporate sustainability or responsible business conduct. We have some examples here on some regulations. The first one is UTR, the EU timber regulation. It has been enforced since 2013. It prohibits operators in Europe from placing illegally harvested timber and products into the EU. The second one is EU deforestation regulation proposal. This only been published last November 2021. And if it is approved, this will replace the current EU timber regulation. The third one is Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive proposal. This is also recently published in February 2022 by the European Union. And this directive will require both EU and non-EU companies to conduct due diligence across global value chain to make sure that all human rights, environmental, and climate change impacts in their global value chains are properly addressed. The fourth one is Australian Illegal Logging Prohibition Act. This has been enforced since 2012. This act bans the import of illegally logged timber and timber products into Australia and prohibits the processing of the Australian grown logs that has been illegally harvested. And the last one is the oldest one, which is US Lacey Act. This was introduced in the US since 1900 to ban the the transport of illegally captured animals or wildlife products across the US state lines or international borders. Since 2008, this regulation has been extended the scope to include timber, paper, and other forest products. And this regulation sets out penalties for those found guilty of trading in illegal forest products. Next, please. So yeah, this is about the EU deforestation regulation. So of the 5 regulations that I've mentioned before, I'm going to talk more about EU deforestation regulation because I think this will be relevant for everyone. So according to the text of the regulation, the purpose of this regulation is to minimize consumption of products coming from supply chains associated with deforestation or forest degradation, and increase EU demand for and trade in legal and deforestation-free commodities and products. Next. The following commodities will be in the scope of the proposed regulation. It includes wood, beef, palm oil, soy, coffee, cocoa, and other derived products such as leather, chocolate, and furniture. In other words, these commodities, to be able to enter to EU, operator should be able to demonstrate that they are deforestation free. Next. According to the text of the regulations, prior to placing the relevant commodities and products on the market and or before exporting them, operators should exercise due diligence with regards to all relevant commodities and products supplied by each particular supplier. For the purpose of this regulation, the due diligence should include the collection of information and documents needed to fulfill the requirement of EU deforestation regulation. And then they also have to conduct risk assessment. And if there are risks identified, they should mitigate the risk. Next, please. Next. Whoops. I think it's too much. Yeah. Okay, the first picture doesn't show. I'm not sure why, but I have this some examples here on the other reason why risk assessment is important is because more big brands or retailers are implementing responsible sourcing policies, such as Nestle. They have net zero map, which target 100% deforestation free for primary supply chains by 2022, using 100% certified sustainable cocoa by 2025. Cocoa and coffee by 2025. And also they will continue make changes until they reach net zero emission by 2050. So that's Nestle, but I'm sorry, this doesn't show. The next one is IKEA. They have responsible sourcing. By the end of 2022, they claim to have used only FSC certified or recycled wood material, and they will continue to only use certified material in the future. Unilever also have zero deforestation policy, in which they committed to achieving their deforestation-free supply chain by 2023. This means by the end of 2023, all their raw materials will come from places that are verified as deforestation and conversion-free. Lastly, as the example here is the Ferrero. They have sustainability policy for their main ingredients, including cocoa, hazelnuts, palm oil, sugar, milk, and egg. For cocoa, they say they have sourced the independently managed sustainability standards cocoa, for example, Rainforest Alliance, Fairtrade, and others. And they will also continue to ensure full visibility and traceability of their cocoa across the supply chain. For palm oil, they claim to have 100% traceable palm oil back to the mills, and only use 100% RSPO certified segregated palm oil supply chain. Next, please. The third reason why risk assessment is important because more sustainability certification initiative or guidance now require risk assessment as well. For example, the FSC control would, and then there's also accountability framework, OECD FAO guidance for sustainable, responsible agriculture supply chain, and lastly, the preferred by nature sustainability framework. For accountability framework, there is a screenshot here from the requirement. Core principle 5, which requires supply chain assessment and traceability and address the risk across their supply chain. Next, please. This is also an example from the OECD FAO guidance for responsible agriculture supply chain, which they also include the 5 steps of due diligence, which includes establishing strong enterprise management system for responsible supply chain, identify, assess, and prioritize risk in the supply chain. Step 3, design and implement a strategy to respond to identified risks in the supply chain. Step 4, verify supply chain due diligence. And step 5, report on supply chain due diligence. Next, please. To summarize why we need risk assessment, because more countries and regions are implementing regulations on corporate sustainability or responsible business conduct. And then more big brands, retailers are also implementing responsible sourcing policy. And lastly, because more sustainability certification initiative or guidance now require risk assessment. Next, please. Now I'm gonna introduce you to some of the risk assessment tools that we have. Next, please. First, we have Preferred by Nature Sourcing Hub. This is a place where you can find a useful tool for risk assessment. It provides a coarse-grained risk assessment conduct at national or subnational scale for commodities that often link to deforestation, including timber, beef, soy, and palm oil. Next, please. Yeah, again. Next, please, Boo. And one more time. Yeah, okay, so it shows all now. For timber legality risk tool, we have 71 countries that has been assessed for timber legality risk assessment. And then to complement this, for some countries, we also have, so for all countries, we have overview of applicable legislation. For some countries, we have risk mitigation guide to help identify the risk in the supply chain and what to do about them. And we also have document guide to help determine exactly what type of documents to request from the suppliers, what they should look like, and how to verify their authenticity. Next, please. For palm oil, we have corporate social responsibility risk assessment for 3 major palm oil producing countries, including Indonesia, Malaysia, and Ghana. For Malaysia, it is separated into Peninsular, Sabah, and Sarawak. And for Indonesia, we have different risk assessments for Sumatra, Kalimantan, and West Papua. We also complement this risk assessment with risk mitigation guide to help identify the risks in the supply chain and what to do about them, and supplier evaluation checklist to help companies to identify suppliers' compliance with each indicator and required documents that have been submitted to show the compliance. Next, please. For due diligence toolkit, you can access it in this website. We have some templates that you might find useful for companies that don't have the system or the quality management system yet there. We have procedure template and policy template and due diligence guidelines. As a main core part of the due diligence, which consists of 3 steps, information gathering, risk assessment, and risk mitigations. We also have several documents that you might find useful. Supplier management form, supply chain mapping template, supplier letter template. And for risk assessment, you can use our sourcing hub, risk assessment checklist, risk assessment guide, and certification evaluation framework that benchmark different certification schemes against the regulation, for example, UTR. For risk mitigation, we have supplier audit checklist, mitigation guide, and document guide. Next, please. Sorry, some texts are disappear here. Other than that due diligence toolkit, we also recently published our sustainability framework. This is a universal tool applicable to all commodities worldwide and suitable for both large and small companies that are seriously committed to sustainable business practices and to meet legal requirements. While it works as a single universal framework, it can be tailored to each commodity, enabling relevant and focused applications. Next, please. The sustainability framework can be used in different ways. For the farm or forest manager, they can use the sustainability framework in principle as a normal certification standard to evaluate conformance on site or evaluating their performance against the standard requirement of the framework. For the downstream companies, for example, trader, manufacturer, retailers, they can apply the due diligence system using risk-based approach, and the requirement of the sustainability framework will be working as the risk indicators instead of the performance indicators. Next, please. This is some of the documents that complements the sustainability framework. The left hand is the sustainability program for or system requirement for land managers. And the right hand is the system requirement for supply chain due diligence. Next, please. Now the main part of this presentation, which is how to conduct the risk assessment. Next. Before starting conducting the risk assessment, we need to design first the risk assessment criteria and make sure it aligns with the company's commitments and mainstream sustainability standards or framework. These are core principles and criteria related to legality, social, environmental, and climate change issues. Next. For the purpose of this example of risk assessment, we're gonna focus on the legality topics. The process of due diligence is structured as gathering information or obtain information about the supply chain, and then risk assessment, which is to evaluate the risk of non-conforming material entering the supply chain, and risk mitigation, which aims to mitigate any identified risks that found during the risk assessment. Next. Step 1, gathering informations. There are two types of informations that we would usually collect. The first one is the supply chain information. This information or documents are specific to supply chain that should indicate the traceability and risk characteristics on legal, social, and environmental criteria. So the documents that are related to supply chain information would be invoices, supply chain map, transport documents, land tenure documents, harvest permit, HCV report, certification status, environmental impact assessment, etc. And then for the generic information, we should also check the generic information that should be able to conduct. We should use this information to assess the risk of the supply chain. The kind of generic information includes a risk assessment tool, such as the one that I've already showed you from Sourcing Hub, information database, NGO reports, stakeholder consultation, corruption perception index or CPI, and UN or EU sanctions. Next, please. Information that we will collect should be sufficiently detailed to allow the company to identify and mitigate effectively the risk of non-compliance with the company's commitment. So on the right hand, you can see the picture of the result of risk assessment for Vietnam from Sourcing Hub. In here, you can see the criteria is according to the EU timber regulation, which only focus on legality. The more risk, as seen as red or specified risk, means more documents should be collected. So for example, here, if you're sourcing timber from a private company in Vietnam, which is identified as specified risk, more documents should be collected to make sure that there is no risk related to legal, land tenure and management rights. But if you collect, if you sourcing rubber wood from state forests in Vietnam, which is concluded as low risk, less documents will be needed. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, so this is the example of land tenure certificate from Vietnam. What we usually keep in mind when we evaluate the information is the relevance. What does this information tell us about the compliance or risk of non-compliance with the commitments? Is the information genuine? Any database available to verify? And does this information apply to the supply chain or shipment under assessment? So for this case of land tenure document, they usually have expiry date, which shows the validity of the document. That is something that we will make sure that it is still valid. And then we should also check that if the certificate is signed or sealed by the relevant governmental agency, is the name of the land user and the location is the same as the one written in the packing list or invoice, and the business license if the source of the timber is from a forest management company. Next, please. When we conduct the risk assessment, each company on the supply chain should be assessed against the same standard or checklist. However, the risk assessment will focus on particular criteria with potential risks relevant to each section of the supply chain. For example, here you can see if the at the forest level, the risk assessment will focus on the land tenure issue, deforestation issue, conversion, HCV, health and safety, and workers' rights, for example. But for companies in the middle of the supply chain, like sawmill, furniture factory, and trader, there will be a risk of mixing that we should also pay attention to make sure that there is no mixing of material with illegally sourced material. And for trader or exporter, there will be also risks that are related to export import, such as customs, CITES, and transfer pricing risk. Next, please. When we conduct risk assessment, there are three main questions that we would ask ourselves. Are the specified risks present in the country of a harvest or production? If yes, are they relevant to the supply chain that being assessed? If yes, have they already been mitigated by certification or an action or the documents provided? Next, please. Risk assessment criteria for Vietnam here, you can see it's some of the relevant questions that we should check. whether there is sufficient information about the origin of harvest. Is the traceability evidence? Is there risk of mixing? Can the date, material type, quantity of the documents match with each other? Is there any suspected document? Is the species commonly available in the origin? Is it protected from harvesting or banned from trading? And what evidence has been provided to mitigate this risk as listed on this picture? So there are a lot of risks. Then more evidence should be collected to mitigate this risk. Next, please.
Ibu Ria, apologies before you start. 5 more minutes for your presentation, please. Thank you.
Okay, we have 4 more slides here. This is the case example for timber legality assessment for a furniture factory based in Indonesia, which is sourcing solid wood from sawmill in Vietnam, and the final product is supplied to a retailer in Japan. So you can see the companies, the supply chain is divided into 3 countries here, and the risks in each countries will be different. For example, in Vietnam, there will be more risk in the forest level, which means more documents should be collected at the forest level. But we also have to provide. They also have to provide invoice, packing list, land use certificate, harvest permit, all the invoice along this between each tier in supply chain should be collected to evidence the traceability of the material. Yeah, next, please. So once the documents are collected and then assess, the next step is to assess against the risks that are highlighted in the coarse grain risk assessment or risk assessment of the sourcing country, and also the processing country. For example, before there will be a risk of mixing in Indonesia, and the risk of at the forest level in the Vietnam. And then we should assess each criteria. Sorry, can you go back? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we should conclude whether the overall supply chain is low risk or negligible risk. Low risk or negligible, or high, specified, or non-negligible. So we usually divide it into 3 categories: low risk, specified, or non-applicable for each criteria here. So for low risk, when all concerns are addressed, all criteria are addressed as being low risk, and or when documents are provided to evidence as being low risk. In a risk assessment, the company needs to sufficiently justify the risk of non-compliance with the commitment is low. And then for specified risks, this is when some concerns have not been addressed, or one or more criteria are assessed as being high risk. So if there are specified or high risk, the company will have to address it at the mitigation step. Next, please. So for mitigation, there will be some actions that we can do to mitigate the risk. For example, supplier evaluation, collecting more documents. But we can also utilize the certification scheme. So certification or other third-party verified schemes can be used in the risk assessment or mitigation procedure to address the risk of deforestation, land conversion, health and safety at the forest or farm level. Some chain of custody standards can also address risk of mixing at the supply chain. However, we should keep in mind that some requirements of the certification might not address all commitments that are applied by the company or some requirements from the regulation. So we should pay attention to the scheme gaps and weakness and the corruption perception index of the origin country or the supply chain country, because there will be also risk of falsification of documents or false claim of certification. Next, please. This is our last slide, the best practice for record keeping and systems. As a best practice, we normally recommend companies to establish and keep up-to-date due diligence system to ensure that they can guarantee compliance with the requirements. The due diligence system should be reviewed at least once a year and publicly report their due diligence system. The last one is the best practice for record keepings that normally required by many certification schemes, which is to keep the records for at least 5 years. Next, please. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ibu Ria, for your presentation. It's really enlightening, and how you give stepwise approach for companies that especially it will be useful for companies that haven't done this risk assessment, but also can be useful for companies that have done their risk assessment. Thank you again. And now we're going to go into another topic, not so far, it's still in the same realm of risk, but the next session will be delivered by Rida Nurafiati, which will discuss about after companies doing their risk assessment, how they can reporting or disclosing their action on this risk assessment. So without further ado, I will pass the session to Rida. But also I wanted to remind all the participants here that you can send your question, for example, from Ibu Ria's presentation just now in the Q&A box. We will respond to your question over the time. Thank you. So Rida, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marini, for handing over the floor. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rida Nurafiati, and I'm the Senior Corporate Engagement Officer from CDP, Southeast Asia and Oceania. Yeah, thank you for all the participants for joining the session. So for this session, I'll be talking more about how to disclose actions on risk management through CDP. So for those of you who are new to CDP, CDP is a global nonprofit organization, and we're working with the companies, investors, cities, states, and regions to measure and manage the environmental impacts. We were founded in 2000 and headquartered in London. And as of now, we're the most comprehensive collection of self-reported environmental data that utilized by investors, purchasing organizations, and policymakers around the group. To collect corporate environmental data, we developed questionnaires and scoring methodology across 3 main themes, which are climate change, water security, and forest. And every year, CDP requests for corporate environmental data on behalf of the 2 authority groups on the left box here, which are from investor signatories and also from large purchasing companies. And these large purchasing companies is our supply chain program member that requests data from the suppliers. The data that we collect through this process is being fed back again to the 2 requesting authorities and also being used to inform the capital markets to drive environmental action. I hope it now gives you just a general sense on how CDP operates and also the role that CDP plays in the global environmental disclosure system. And now I'm going to talk about how CDP intersects with the TCFD reporting. And for those of you who are not that familiar with the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures, it may be useful to give a glimpse of what TCFD is and how it fits into the climate change agenda. So after the Paris Agreement, as you may all aware that Paris Agreement, where global leaders meet together, try to limit the global temperature rise. After that conference, G20 finance ministers asked the Financial Stability Board to review how the climate risks were accounted for by businesses. And then the FSB setting up the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures to prepare guidelines for the companies to measure and report their climate-related issues. This task force and then issued a series of recommendations, which lay out here on the table. There are 5 recommendations on governance, strategy, risk, and metrics. So how TCFD is linking the climate data and also financial data. So starting from the left, the TCFD divides climate-related risk into 2 classes, the transition risk on the top and also the physical risk at the bottom. So the transition risk, this means that policy and legal risk, for example, like there is an increase in the carbon price or there is a regulation on the carbon tax, as well as risks related to the switching of the low carbon technology. And there are also market and reputational risks, which are associated with the changing consumer behavior towards more sustainable materials. And for physical risk, it is divided into acute and also chronic, which means that for the acute risk, it means extreme weather, and also for the chronic risk, it refers to the long-term shift in the weather patterns, which will affect the, for example, the crop's productivity. And at the same time, climate change also bring opportunities on the left, on the right hand. So climate change bring opportunities in the form of, for example, greater energy efficiency and access to new energy sources. And this opportunity can also take the shape of low carbon products and services and access to new markets, particularly in a jurisdiction where they have very ambitious climate targets. And these risks and opportunities have direct impact on the company financial elements, which are shown on the bottom of this graph. For example, in terms of corporate income statement, changes in the customer demand could lead to increased revenue for companies that can shift to low carbon goods or services. On the other hand, legal and policy development could raise expenditure in the form of higher compliance costs or litigation costs for companies. And with respect to the balance sheet, physical risk, whether it's acute or chronic risk, it could cause the early retirement of asset, either through the damage or because of the asset is obsolete, or because the assets are classified as a high risk. In short, climate change will present each company with a unique set of risks and opportunities. And thus, TCFD enables all companies to consider how risk and opportunities affect its current and future financial position. So this is just a brief overview about how the TCFD works. And the next slide on the illustration, this is a visualization of how CDP aligns its questionnaire with the recommendation from the TCFD. So on the left side, TCFD starts with starting point that climate change is a financial risk, and they have 4 pillars: governance, risk, metrics and targets, and strategy. And these recommendations indicate to investors and companies what kind of aspects that they should be evaluating. And then by means of our CDP questionnaire, CDP provides companies with a breakdown of the recommendations into comparable metrics that designed to show data that allows stakeholders and to evaluate the company performance against the recommendation. And CDP also issue a guidance, and this guidance also tells the companies exactly what kind of data that should be provided. And company use our guidance to identify what kind of data or information that they should collect. And then the last is our CDP scoring methodology, which incentivizes companies and also reward them for following the best practices. So the outcome of this disclosure is a standardized and comparable data. And also this structured questionnaire will help the data user and also the investors and other stakeholders to provide actionable insight. So then the question is, what are the relevance of forest-related risk to the companies? In this slide, we see that there's several types of transition risk for the companies. So for example, on the policy and legal risk, it may arise from the current or expected policy related to the deforestation or on regulation on the commodity import. For example, the European Union that has set more stringent import regulation on the specific forest commodity to be deforestation free. And then for the reputational and market risk, it includes the changing consumer behavior, negative media coverage, and also increased commodity price due to limited forest resources. And then for the physical risk, it may arise from the extreme weather events or subtle change in the weather patterns or precipitation, which affects the crops' productivity or increase the spread of new disease and also forest fires. In this slide, this data is taken from 2021 CDP disclosure. So it reported that the forest-related risk have a potential impact of up to almost $80 billion. And the cost of responding to the forest-related risk was estimated at $6.7 billion. And the most common type of risk reported by the companies are reputational and market risk. So 47% of companies who reported the forest disclosure to CDP mentioned that they have identified risk related to reputational and also market, which have the estimated financial impact of up to 50.8 billion. But there's also a new hope. So companies who can turn the risk into opportunities, they see some like valuable insights here. So for example, the most commonly reported opportunity is on the products and service, as you may see in the left graph. And this opportunity in the products and service, such as increasing brand value, increasing the innovation of the company, and also increased security of production. And the second most reported opportunity is from the markets, which means that they have opportunity to increase the demand of certified materials and increase availability of the low carbon products, and also the possibility to expand into a new market. And this is a quote from BNP Paribas Asset Management, which is one of our CDP investor signatories. The statement from BNP Paribas calls on companies to tackle financial impact of forest-related risk within the operation and also global chain. So there is an increasing concern from investors as well about the forest-related risk in the portfolio. And in addition to that, shareholder advocate at Green Century Capital Management also mentioned that among other impacts, deforestation drives systemic risks like climate change and biodiversity loss that affect not just company in agricultural supply chain, but also throughout the portfolio. Okay, I think that's enough about the first introduction of the TCFD and also risk reported by companies through CDP. Now let's jump into the key topic on how to disclose forest-related risk through CDP. So this is the CDP Forest Environmental Action Roadmap. This provides guidance on the journey towards improved environmental stewardship. And CDP scoring will therefore aim to look holistically at the company environmental management. And company also should aim for the best practices at this stage. And our recommendation for the best practice stage, such as company should integrate the forest issues into all governance mechanism. And the second, the company is expected to maintain a high level of certified production or consumption with a solid traceability system. And also a company is expected to have a detailed supplier engagement approach that verifies no deforestation commitment. And now let's deep dive into the forest module in CDP Forest Questionnaire. So this module on the procedure, it will focus on the information on the company robustness, comprehensiveness, and also integrity of their risk assessment procedure. And the question 2.2 is a new question that we asked this year. So we will not provide any example from the company response, but for other question, we will provide the examples of the company who perform the best in the CDP disclosure. So for example, on the question 2.1a, select the options that best describe the procedure for identifying and assessing forest-related risks. Here you can find what kind of information that CDP asks, and also the recommendation on like what is expected from the best practices company. So for example, to answer this question, the company is expected to conduct regular forest-related risk assessment and having the long-term horizon on the risks that are being considered, and also using multiple tools to describe how they use the tool on forest-related risk assessment. Not only that, but also companies expected to describe the issues and also the stakeholders that are being considered in the risk assessment. Here is the illustration of what we ask in the questionnaire. So there's a drop-down menu here on what kind of tools and methods that company used. So for example, preferred by nature sourcing hub is also one of the options that company can choose from responding to this question. And here is the example from Kao Corporation, a Japan company. So Kao give detailed information on how they use the risk assessment tools. And also they mentioned that this risk assessment tool is being used for a full coverage with a regular frequency annually. And also they consider this risk for more than 6 years ahead. And also another point is that they also use multiple risk assessment tools, which they lay out here. They use the internal company method, external consultant, and also WWF, Japan's responsible purchasing checklist. And they also describe in detail on how they use the risk assessment tools and what issues are being considered by the company. The next example is from Firmenich, a Swiss company. It's more likely the same. They also mention about the full coverage of risk assessment with a regular frequency and long-term horizon. And they also use multiple risk assessment tools. which one of them includes the Global Forest Watch Pro that are developed by WRI. And they also provide the description on how they use the risk assessment tools and what kind of issues and which stakeholders that they consider in the risk assessment. For the next question, this is a new question in CDP Forest Questionnaire. The company needs to provide information on the detail of the value chain mapping for its disclosed commodity. There are several information that CDP asks here. And also the recommendation is the company is expected to disclose per forest risk commodity. And the company is expected to have some percentage of the total suppliers covered within the selected tier. And the next module on the risk and opportunities. And for the purpose of this webinar, I'll only discuss about the questions related to risk. The main question will ask about the company's definition of substantive risk and identified risk for both direct operation and also in the rest of value chain, and also the potential impact figure of the risk and how much the potential cost to respond to the risk. On the definition of substantive financial risk, we ask like detailed description on what they consider substantive and also the threshold or indicator that is quantifiable for us to see like how much impact is substantive and not, and also how they use the indicators. And the example that we took is from Danone. So Danone explained about the several thresholds of what they consider substantive. And they also mentioned that substantive financial impact is identified whenever the magnitude of the impact is greater than 1% of their net income. So, so it's very quantifiable. And then they also explain about the quantifiable indicator that they use, and also some explanation here. Now let's move on to the next question for F3.1b. The company is expected to inform the data users here on the risk identified with the potential to have substantive financial impact or strategic impact. And there's quite a lot of information that we ask here. So please make sure that the company should not leave any cells blank, because we will not be able to score any blank response. And the recommendation for answering this question is that the company need to explain company-specific details about how the impact identified will affect the company's operation and also the supply chain, and also how they actually respond to it, and also providing the financial figure and also the methods to calculate the financial figure, and also how they use the approach to calculate the financial figure. The example that we show here is from L'Oreal. I split it into two slides. So for the first slide here, L'Oreal explained the detail about, for example, the forest risk commodity is palm oil, and also the type of risk is on the reputational end markets, and it affects their global scale. And this occur in the supply chain as well. So not only in their own operation, and also the risk driver is the shift in the consumer preferences to more sustainable products. And the impact is that they expect there will be reduced demand for the products and services. And in the company specific description, they explain detail about how the impact identified will affect the company's supply chain. And also there's some time scale that they write here on the time frame. It's 4 to 6 years, and also the likelihood of this risk to happen and will impact the company. And then the second slide, it's still the example from L'Oreal. So L'Oreal also give the estimated financial impact. They give the range, the minimum and also the maximum financial figure, and they explain how they calculate it, and also which data they are taking this from. And also they explain about the response to this risk, and they explain that the response is to increase the use of increase the use of sustainably sourced materials. And they also estimate the cost of response, including the methods on how to calculate the cost of response.
Ibu Rida, just a note that you have 5 more minutes. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think that's all about the questionnaires. And I'm just giving some key resources. Like if you want to see further detail on how each response is being scored, and what kind of recommendation that your company should consider when filling in the first questionnaire. So you can just go through cdp.net and then click on the top right on the website and click guidance, and then you can see the scoring methodology here, which you can download. And yeah, I would like to also remind you, like if you are a requested company here, that the disclosure platform will close soon. So if you want to be scored, make sure that you have filled in the questionnaire and submit it by 27th of July. And for further information, you can also check the FAQ webpage in CDP website. But if you still have some other queries, you can also drop me an email here or Ibu Rini. So yeah, I think that's the end of my session. I'll be happy to address any questions that the audience have. Thank you. I'll give it back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Rida, and also Ibu Ria for the insightful presentation. We hope that the information provided can guide participants today to who just started their journey in decoupling deforestation from the supply chain, or those who have implemented risk assessment to strengthen the process and implementation. So now, before we move on to Q&A session, we do have several questions in the chat in the Q&A box. But first of all, I would like to get your participation to fill up some survey for our evaluation process. Your survey is very much, helpful for us to, like when to provide some inputs how we can develop our training program in the future. Now, if you see in your screen, there are, like the polling have been pop up. So you can see there are some questions. How useful is the content of this webinar? So we appreciate if you can help to fill the survey so we can know for the next, for the next training, what should we improve, and how we can provide more information better for participants. So I'll give you 15-second time to fill up this questionnaire, and then we can go to the Q&A session. And I wanted to remind you again, for those of you who have a question, you still have time to put your question on a Q&A box where we can, answer your question live. Or if you're a bit shy to ask it here, later we will share the address for Ibu Ria and Ibu Rida, where you can send email asking for your, with regard to your question as well. So I guess, yeah, 5 more seconds probably. All right, I think the time is up, so we can now move on to the next session, please. So under the Q&A session, we do have several questions here. So the first question, I would like to ask Ibu Ria to answer. The first question is, we are manufacturing companies, and not directly producing forest commodities. Our product that uses forest risk commodity are a small portion from our products. Do you think we still need to assess the forest risk too? Go ahead, Ibu Ria.
Okay, yeah, I will try to answer this question. The short answer is yes, because so the appropriate risk assessment will be at the supply chain level. So you will have to backtrace your material and then assess the risk along your supply chain back to the forest, even though you're not the producing country. Sorry, not the producing company. And yeah, we also have some, we know some companies that, for example, only use the tag, the paper tag for their clothing material. So they sell clothes and like yeah, clothing products, but they use these little bits of paper for the price tag. And if this company is located in the EU, this tag that's made of paper will also be under the scrutiny of the competent authority, because that will fall under the UTR regulation.
Thank you, Bu. It's very enlightening, because sometimes, companies didn't aware, for example, just from our experience, they sometimes have, the packaging like crate to how do you call it, to package their items for export or import. That's also, it's also included as a forest risk commodity, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, for
like
EU.
Yeah,
that's actually depend on the custom code. Some packaging are included, some packaging are not included. So, but yeah, that depends on the custom code.
Okay. So the best idea is basically to check the regulation itself. What are the commodities that are covered under that specific regulation? Great.
Yes.
Thank you, Ibu Ria. And we have another question, which is, I think this one is for Ibu Rida. So business usually have impact assessment that include risk assessment. How can we report the progress of our company's positive impact in CDP questionnaire?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because what we have presented here is more on the risk. So it looks like we only showcasing the negative side of the company, but actually it's not. So CDP questionnaire aims to look holistically at the context of the business. So we also ask the impacts, not only the negative impacts that the company has created to the like to the environment in general, but we also give the company room to explain the positive impacts, and it will be available in like every section as well. So for example, on the smallholder side, the company can also explain how they join any initiatives, or like how they join like external forum created for like restoration or the conservation projects. So they can explain their positive impacts here. For example, like how many smallholders that they have engaged, and what kind of capacity building or financial incentive that they give to the smallholders, and what other projects that they have joined. So I think for the purpose of this session, because we only highlight the risk, so that's why we ask more on the the potential financial impact of forest related issues. I hope that clarifies.
Okay. Thank you, Ibu Rida. Also, I just wanted to add a little bit notes on Ibu Rida's comment. So basically, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add a little bit note. So in CDP website, you can, I think Ibu Rida also show it in her slide. You can actually see the journey toward how we call it environmental excellence. So basically, CDP has developed some KPIs for companies to kind of, to guide them. What are the metrics to show to show progress? What kind of metrics that needs to be fulfilled by companies to show that they are actually progressing against their commitment for no deforestation, no conversion. And it's all available in the CDP website. I think that's just a little bit addition from my side. Now, I think we only have 2 minutes. I do have one more question, apparently. There is one more question for Ibu Ria. One of our major challenges is that traders are reluctant to tell us exactly which farms they are sourcing from. The farms they source could also change year on year. Any practical example how other companies overcome this?
Yeah, so we found this a lot actually, and so we do risk assessment on daily basis, and this kind of thing happens almost like every time. Yeah, this is a challenge. There are some mitigation measures that we would recommend. For example, change your supplier, or ask them to be certified, because once they are certified, their risk, some of the risk can be considered mitigated. So if they're only sourcing from the low risk country, we can be quite sure that the risk can be mitigated. But if the farms are located in the low risk country, but if the farm is located in the high risk country, that will be another story. And we understand that this is really difficult for many companies.
Yeah, so the journey, companies not alone, a lot of companies face the same problem, and probably, like collective action, for example, this jurisdictional approach, having like sourcing from low risk area can actually help to reduce this kind of sourcing risk. Thank you very much, Ibu Ria, and I'm just aware of time that we are on 15 right now, so I'm just going to close this webinar. So for those of you who still have questions, you can directly share your questions to Ibu Ria or Ibu Rida through the email that we shared to you. And we will share the presentation together with the email address post this webinar. And then we do have several webinars on pipeline. So throughout month of June and July, we do have webinars to guide you, especially for companies that disclosing to CDP or would like to know more about CDP. So basically, we will have a webinar every week, and for next week, on the 23rd of June, we will have webinar focusing on how companies can set a robust no deforestation, no conversion policies and target. And then we will have a guest speaker, which is Jirani Jandrung Mutai from Charun Pokpan, and also Muhammad Muhsin from Accountability Framework. So for participants here, we encourage you to join our webinar next week to learn how you can set robust commitment policy and target. Thank you very much for your attention, and on behalf of CDP and Preferred by Nature, thank you very much, Ibu Ria. Thank you very much, Ibu Rida. We would like to thank all the participants here, and have a good day, and we hope to see you again in our next webinar. Thank you, and bye-bye.